Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pinecker, and today it is January 14th, 2026, and we're taping here on a kind of a cool day here in Florida. And just want to let everybody know that maybe many of you are noticing that the bookshelf has less and less books on it. It's because we are in the process of moving things out, and we're going to tell the story one day about this remarkable story that happened that enabled us to get a new home and thus a new studio, which is really exciting to us as well. Also, just want to let you know that I am continuing to distribute Book of Mormons to my local missionaries, given to me courtesy of Josh Gailey of the Church of Jesus Christ. And I've been trying to get a hold of Kai Van Leeuwen, who is the host of the Jesus Loves Mormons a YouTube channel, who sent me some a modern English New Testaments that I can also give to the missionaries. Of course, now what's so fascinating, folks, is uh, Latter-day Saints and missionaries, you can, for Come Follow Me and for study as well as for Sunday school, you can now use modern English translations of the Bible. And of course, I have predicted that I think it's inevitable that we will have a modern English translation of the Book of Mormon happening down the road. I wouldn't be at all surprised. So just a lot of new changes and developments happening in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it's often at breakneck speed, and it's really fascinating to me. So yeah, I'll be continuing these interfaith conversations that we're having. Got some great interviews coming. Grant Underwood is going to be coming on the program. And we talk about his latest book, published by an evangelical publisher. Yes, Mormon theologians are now getting published by evangelical publishers. Oh my gosh, what's going to go on? The gatekeepers have to be going crazy. But that's not why you tuned in today. Of course, I want to welcome my special guest. Oh, you know what? I need to ask you a question. First of all, I need to
Mhm.
get the proper pronunciation of your last name. And then also, you can maybe explain to me why is your name in Japanese or whatever foreign language that is?
Yeah, that's on the Zoom call. My name is in Japanese because I was in Japan for a year. I taught English and then I moved to Tokyo to learn Kung Fu. So that
Okay.
was a really fun experience. I'm hoping to go back at some point to finish my training in a 2 week trip. But so that's the Japanese spelling for my
And then
name.
how
But
do
on
I
the
pronounce
book,
it? I meant to see, I always make this mistake.
yes. But on the book, that is the Americanized version of the Slavic last name Smilanich, or
Smilanich.
Smil. We pronounce it Smilanich. You
Smilanich.
know, like you're smelling with your nose and you're itching,
Uh-huh.
so Smilanich. So
And of course,
it's
this is the Americanized version of this name. Oh my goodness.
that's
And of
the
course,
that's the American version because the Slavic version from Croatia is Smilanjic. So
okay.
we removed the J and added an H to
Awesome.
try to make it simpler, and yet people still have a hard time pronouncing it. I mean, I have a whole list from when I was on a mission in Philadelphia of just every. I wrote down every name that everybody gave me. One lady looked at my name once, gave up halfway through, and said the first thing that came to mind, Selinkwich, and I'm like, where did the Q come from? So I've had that. I got Samich, Smirnoff, I all sorts of crazy.
Awesome. Well, I think that's great.
People tend to put an E after the L because it's Smil, and so they think it's smile and itch, but no,
Okay.
it's just smell and itch.
Okay, well, that's
No,
great. Thank you for clarifying.
it's pronounced exactly as it's spelled. I don't know how people keep messing it up, but
Well,
they
I,
do.
I get called Pinnaker all the time, so
Uh,
but either, and by the way, the Y used to be a J in the Dutch in my last name, so we kind of did a similar
okay,
thing. So this is Latter-day Saints Are Existentialists. This is the name of the book that you have recently written and released, and you
sure.
requested to come on my program to talk about this book and also educate the audience about what an existentialist is and how it does perhaps relate to Mormon cosmology and philosophy. And before we get there, I just wanted to share with the audience a couple things here. Um, Stephen also has a YouTube channel that I want to share with the audience. It's called This Saints Theory, and
Yeah.
uh, and he's been doing this for a while, and he covers a lot of interesting topics and about philosophy, and this is a great resource if you're interested in philosophy as it relates to vis-a-vis the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Also, this is the link that we're going to provide in the description to the actual book that we'll be talking about today as well. And did you want to say anything about your YouTube channel while I have it up?
Yeah, sure. Well, I suppose this could be a good time to bring up my PowerPoint. But essentially, I got into I've been into philosophy and Mormonism, because I was born into the church, baptized into it, went on a went on a mission, but it was post mission that I really started getting into philosophy and radical ideas and stuff like that. I started to incorporate a lot more, uh, watching a lot of YouTube channels like Wisecrack really got me into the headspace of thinking about philosophies outside of Mormonism and thinking and making connections here and there wherever I see them. And then I really started it during the pandemic when I was, bored and didn't have anything else to do. So I just decided to just go with it. And it's been a great experience so far. It's a very small channel right now. I've been inactive on it for some time now, but maybe this will be the jolt I need to really get back into it and start making some more videos. I've got a lot of great ideas in my head. I just need to sit down and really execute them and find the time to do so.
Okay, great. So of course we'll have a link in the description to the to Steven's YouTube channel as well. So you prepared a slide presentation that you
Mm-hmm.
want to kind of go over with the audience, and then of course I'll have some questions for you about the slide presentation as well as your book that I got to read last week.
Sure.
So I'm handing the floor over to you, my friend. Just do this enable screen. I've enabled screen share, and let's have at it.
All right. Thank you so much. And again, I just wanted to say I'm so grateful that you're willing to let me come on. I've been trying to get involved with a lot of other, bigger, more Mormon related YouTube channels for a while now with not much success. I tried to do it with Word Radio, but that kind of went nowhere and a lot of other people. But so I'm so grateful again for giving me this platform to
You're
share
welcome.
my thoughts with your
You're welcome. And
audience.
and I want to give credit to you for being very persistent. And I've told many
Hmm.
authors and many YouTubers or other podcasters who want to come on my platform, persistence pays off. You've been very persistent, and I want to commend you for that because I tell people I don't really book the guests book themselves in many ways. And I want to thank you for being persistent and again this and I want to also want just before you get started on this because philosophy can be very intimidating to people. And sometimes the language can be so dense it's hard to understand what they're even saying. I wanted to say that this book is very readable, very accessible to a lay audience. So if you're looking for an introduction, this is a good place to start, especially as it interacts with Mormon philosophy as well. And so I just want to congratulate you on kind of giving us a really accessible book to lay people, and I enjoyed that as well. So um,
Sure.
let's hop right into this, man. I'm really curious to hear your presentation.
Yeah, like I was saying, like if you try to read guys like Heidegger or Sartre, there's so much that goes over your head. You're like, what the hell are these big, big brain guys talking about? I don't know what they're saying half the time. Even I struggle whenever I pick up their books, but I've, I think most of my philosophy education, of course, comes from YouTube, but I do pick up the occasional philosophy book here and there. And of course, my big boy, my main guy is Nietzsche. I love Nietzsche. He's a really, really great writer. I think we need to canonize his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, into the LDS canon of scriptures because it's that amazing. But in any case, let's get into this.
Great. I love it. I love it. Yeah, that's always an open canon in the
Mm-hmm.
restoration, right? So you just never know. 10,000 years.
Exactly. We need to embrace the open canonness of
Yes,
it. The
absolutely.
Bible is great, the Book of Mormon is great, but there's so much more wisdom and knowledge out there that I think that we can also be incorporating as well.
Fascinating. I love it.
So let's get into this. So can you see that?
Yep, it's popping up, my friend. There we go.
Okay. So welcome everyone, my brothers and sisters, to Existential Mormonism. This is, of course, my YouTube channel. You'll see under my headline, I teach the philosophies of men mingled with scripture, which comes from the temple. Satan says it, but I think it's something that, there's a difference between letting the gospel go through world philosophy and letting the philosophy go through the gospel. And so that's sort of what I try to do. But maybe sometimes it goes back and forth. So this is my YouTube channel. Like I said, I don't have a whole lot of subscribers. Most philosophy YouTube channels are very, very small. I only know if like, I think Jacob Hansen is maybe the only, like, you could say, quote unquote, big philosophy YouTube channel, though I would characterize it more as light philosophy. He doesn't really get into the really deep stuff like I try to get into,
Yeah, I
but
would agree. I would say his more is an apologetic. It's more of an
yeah,
apologetic.
it's more apologetic. I try to stay away from, I'll make apologetic videos every once in a while. You'll see on here I have one for going after Lessa Grenfell for her a Book of Abraham video, but for the most part, I try to stay away from apologetics. I only do it like every once in a while when I just kind of feel like it. But so I wouldn't consider myself an apologist for the church. I like to get into the really deep philosophy and being able to give people a new perspective on the church that probably they haven't considered before, a new angle that they probably haven't considered before. So that's what I do. I'm not a historian. I wouldn't call myself an apologist for the church. I'm strictly a philosopher. And so that's what I do. So anything that if anybody wants to critique anything that I say on history, then that's go ahead, because I'm not a historian. But what I would like people to consider and examine is my philosophical takes. Like those are the things I want people to consider seriously.
Okay, great.
So of course, the first question I would pose is, what is a philosopher? What comes to your mind when you think of a philosopher?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because some people think of Jesus as a philosopher and use his teachings as a philosophy. And maybe some of them are even don't even necessarily believe in God, but believe in the teachings of Christ. You have
Mhm.
people, when you think of well, like Plato and Socrates and Nietzsche and all these other, interesting people throughout history that have been very important in developing the Western mind. Um, there's the Descartes, I think, therefore I am. I mean, you got this is all
Mhm.
part of the Western canon that I think is really important that we do honor and realize that we are the foundational world that we live in as Western Christian culture is very dependent on these important philosophers.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Descartes and Jesus. They are on my screen, but I also have Socrates, who people would consider the father of philosophy. He was the ancient Greeks got so many things going. They got the Olympics going. They got philosophy, Western philosophy going. The Greeks had a lot going for them. They were really, really smart, but also very athletically gifted race of individuals that I think we all should follow in their footsteps, so to speak. So, what was Socrates famous for? Do you know why he was considered the wisest man who ever lived?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I wasn't prepared for taking questions today for this.
time for a time for a philosophy history lesson. So he was famous for he's famous for saying, "I know that I know nothing," and
Oh,
that's
yeah.
why he was considered the wisest man of all time. That is the basis of philosophy: is starting from "I know that I know nothing," and that I am just an open book, and just fill me with what the universe has to give me. In Avatar, they talk about how it is very hard to fill a cup that is already full. And Bruce Lee has this famous story where this one guy thinks he's all great at martial arts, and he comes into his studio, and Bruce Lee takes out a teacup, and he just starts pouring tea into the cup until it's overflowing. He's like, "Wait, stop, stop, stop!" And he's like, "Yeah, so this is you. I cannot put more tea into your cup because it's all overflowing," or something like that.
Mhm.
So when we go into so a philosopher is somebody that invites people to just forget everything you think you know about existence, about anything, and just be an open book. Say, "I know that I know nothing," and just be a child. Be, like what Jesus is always telling us to be a child, because children are of the kingdom of God, so to speak. Just be, that's what he's talking about. be open, be willing to just accept whatever comes your way instead of being this modern cynical guy who's just I know what I know, and I am going to beat everybody who thinks they know more than me. You know, you got to be open, you got to be inviting. That's how we become more loving, you know. You've probably experienced something like that where like you get a lot of people who probably know things and you're like, but have you considered this angle? You know,
Yeah.
or this angle, and you just want to question them and make sure they really know what they're talking about, kind of a thing.
Yeah, certainly. And sometimes I've exposed some people that thought they knew what they were talking about, and then
Hmm.
it didn't quite go so well for them. But that happens now and then too.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but I think, again, I think one of the most important things that I was told when I first got into this space was actually by John Dehlin himself. He says we all need to practice epistemological humility. And I think we could all use that in this space, especially when we have a bunch of know-it-alls and blowhards who are trying to dominate this space and really are coming from a place of ignorance. And it just shows. And I think the more certain somebody is about something, it certainly shows that they probably don't no, they don't know that much. That's the reality
Hmm.
of the situation.
That's the funny paradox. The way that Neil deGrasse Tyson put it, it's like the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yeah.
It's so like you know, and so the I have you mentioned Descartes. I have Descartes up here on the screen. He was sort of like he was very he had that mindset to the 100th degree. He had that dialed up to 11. He thought, I just want to sit down and doubt everything, doubt my reality, doubt everything that I think I know, and find the one core grounded thing that I cannot doubt. He considered maybe the devil is giving me hallucinations and I'm hallucinating my reality and everything like this. And he's like, but no matter what, he could not doubt that he was thinking. And so that's where we get the famous maxim, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Because he could not doubt the fact that he was thinking, and whoever is thinking must exist. But then, of course, Nietzsche came along and was like, "But how do you know that you're the one doing the thinking, and not and somebody else isn't putting thoughts in your head?" So it's like, where does philosophy end? Really, it almost seems like it's turtles all the way down,
Yep.
and but it really that's why it's hard for so many people to get into philosophy. It's because they are so it really requires one to gaze into the abyss to be a philosopher, to just doubt everything and then try to rebuild little chunks and pieces where you can. And so many people, that's dangerous stuff because it can involve nihilism, it can involve uh, doubt, grief, so many things that people are too uncomfortable with. So that's why I think philosophy is very, especially in today's culture with the internet, where everybody thinks they're instantly a knowledgeable person on everything because of the internet. And so I think it's something we should be looking into more.
All right,
So
great.
like my favorite quote that I live my life by is by Thomas Jefferson. Question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear.
Amen to that.
Yeah. What do you think of when you read this quote?
I think Thomas Jefferson was probably one of the greatest minds that our republic has ever produced, and or that helped produce
Mm-hmm.
our republic, if you will. And yeah, I think he's really an important person. And some people think of that he was an atheist, a deist. Perhaps he was, but I think what he brought to the table was so important. I certainly, let me put it this way: I don't really care what um, Thomas Jefferson's beliefs were here on Earth, but I have no doubt in my mind that I will see him in heaven.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. You know, I really wish Trump had more Thomas Jefferson energy in him, but
Yes,
he's
I
just
agree.
so far on the other end of the spectrum.
I agree. And I
Um,
tell people too, I say, that one of the, I consider it, if you are trying to scare children about hell, and that's how they become Christians. That's using fear like that is,
Hmm.
I think that that actually instilling fear in children about hell that causes them to become Christians, I think is really truly now we're seeing the results. We're seeing the fruits of that mentality that manifesting itself in our American culture right now.
Yeah, I can see that. So it's definitely a problem we need to wrestle with. Um, so for me, there's no difference between a philosopher and a prophet. I think what is a prophet? It is somebody that tells the truth. For me, plainly and simply, you can talk about their fruits, but I think in general, it's a prophet is somebody that tells the truth, and that's what philosophers are for me. What do you think of this quote here by Moses? Would God that all the Lord's people were prophets, and that the Lord would put his spirit upon them.
Hmm. Amen. Well, I think it's really interesting because I do think that, there's another quote that a prophet has no honor in his own homeland or home community. I'm butchering it right now off the top of my head, but I think it speaks to
Mhm.
this idea that prophets are not. I tell people said, if you're being told from the prophet, I mean not the from the pulpit, if you're here, if they're telling you what you want to hear, I question if that's really a prophet because I think that prophets are actually there to make you feel uncomfortable and
Absolutely.
not tell you
That's
what you
why I love Nietzsche.
want. Yeah. So I think that's important. Of course, we all know who that is. That's Moses. And how do we know that's Moses? Because he's got horns coming from his head.
Yeah.
That's another interesting story we could talk about some other time. But yeah,
Mhm.
Moses had horns. Interesting.
Yeah. That was when he was coming down off of Mount Sinai and he had just seen God. People were like, "Oh, you got horns on your head," so he had to put a veil over his head to cover the horns.
Yeah.
But in any case, that's a interesting story. So, moving on, what is existentialism? This is where we really start to talk about the branch of philosophy that is called existentialism. And of course, probably Shakespeare was an existentialist because the core central theme of existentialism is to be or not to be, which is what Hamlet, questions about. So Hamlet, most existentialist philosophers would call the quintessential existentialist play because it's about a man who's doubting his reality. Oh, did I really see my father's ghost? And did he really tell me that my uncle killed him and that I should avenge him and take his life? And he's just having all these thoughts in his head. And at one point, he's about to kill his uncle, but his uncle's in the middle of prayer, and he's like, "Oh no! If I kill him during prayer, is he going to go to heaven? I want him to go to hell." And so he's like, and so he just keeps doubting it. He's not much of a action hero. And so that's sort of what it's like to be an existentialist philosopher. You're constantly doubting your reality until it's too late and you fail to act. And so there's a good hard line balance that you need there. And so in my book, that's what I talk. And so these are what you would say are the like four main heads of existentialism. We got Kierkegaard, and then Nietzsche, Sartre, and then Camus. And they all ask, what does it mean to exist? So you have Kierkegaard who asks, what does it mean to exist in the presence of the absolute or God? And then you have Nietzsche, whose famous quote is God is dead. Not the I don't know if you're familiar with the God's Not Dead movies,
Oh, yeah.
but they
I,
horribly misinterpret Nietzsche. I don't think I think they just picked up that quote and ran with it. They didn't actually sit down to read Nietzsche because when Nietzsche says God is dead, he's not saying it to the Christian crowd. He's saying it to an atheist crowd. And he's like, what are we going to do now? We God is dead and we killed him, and
mhm.
now we have is the abyss and nihilism, and now we have to deal with it. It's crazy, man. So that's what he was all about. And then of course Sartre just went all into to atheism, and it's like what if there was never a God? Then we are absolutely free, and we are condemned to be free, and we are responsible for everything we do instead of God. And then Albert Camus is like, well, hang on, God, if God is dead in the philosophical sense, like we killed truth, we killed um sorry, I probably should have explained that. When Nietzsche said God is dead, he meant it in a philosophical manner, not like he was celebrating the literal death of God, but like we killed the death of it's the death of truth, the foundation of morality and stuff like that. So we had to find a new one. And then Camus was like, what does it mean to exist when reality is absurd? So he preferred to call himself an absurdist rather than an existentialist. Like, oh, we got to be like Sisyphus, the guy from ancient Greece who was condemned to roll a boulder up a hill forever, but only for it to fall back down. And we should imagine Sisyphus happy and stuff like that. So let me know if any of this is going over your head,
No, no,
because it
no,
can it can get a little bit complicated.
no. It's not. I'm very. I think myself and most of the audience would be able to track so far with everything you're saying.
Okay, okay, cool. So the existentialist book in the Bible, most people would say, is Ecclesiastes, because it's Solomon who's saying, "Oh, everything is utterly meaningless," and he's this guy who had everything. He was the richest man alive. He was the king. He had all these wives. He had all these riches, and yet it's still he could do whatever he wanted, and yet he still felt empty. He still felt meaningless. And of course, in Ecclesiastes, he's talking about how everything is just constantly repeating and recycling itself, and you're no different. I'm no different from the poorest beggar in my kingdom, and or the we're all just dust in the wind kind of an idea. And for at the end, he talks about how the only salvation is in God, who is the only one who can give us meaning in a way. So existentialism is sort of in a way acknowledging the meaninglessness of existence, but also just working with it and finding meaning however you can. For a guy like Kierkegaard, it was you can find meaning in God. For Nietzsche, it was become the Übermensch, become your own God, make meaning for yourself. For Sartre, it was you can find meaning in simply enjoying in overcoming the anxiety of freedom and becoming an individual. And Camus, it's like, yo, but there is no meaning, so just enjoy life anyways. You can't find it here or there. So everybody is going to choose their own path, can choose their own path of existentialism in a way.
So I'm just curious.
Questioning,
Is there any
sure.
philosophical is meaning that I need to understand about double click to edit, or is that just something?
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay.
So so there's a lot of detail. So this is where I think Mormonism fits into existentialism, because it's all about acknowledging the existence of the individual. It's like, holy crap, I exist. What does it mean to exist? For
Mm-hmm.
how do I find meaning in my existence, kind of
Yeah.
a thing. What is how how free am I to experience myself? And I think that's what guys like Kierkegaard were important. Why guys like Kierkegaard were important, because he noticed that the Dutch church, uh, most people in his time were. He questions, why are you religious? Are you religious because the church, because your pastor, because your parents, or are you religious because of your own personal individualism, because it's what you choose for yourself? And so I think that's what encapsulates existentialism. It's about existing as an individual, apart from the herd, apart from whatever other people think. And I think the best place a person could find that is in a Mormon cosmology in general.
And of course, this
So
being key, of course, the King Follett discourse. really is one of the most important talks that Joseph Smith ever gave, and it um, really kind of created its own cosmology that's quite different than historic traditional Orthodox Christianity.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of the other branches of the Restoration haven't embraced this, and so they tend to be more, uh, more conventional in their cosmologies. That's much closer to historic Christianity. So this is really, I think, this is Joseph Smith's break, like final break with conventional Christianity. I think once he
Hmm.
plunges into this idea of God having a body, that God was a man like us, of flesh and bone, he really blew things up big time. And so this was probably one of the most important, not only one of the most important talks ever given or sermons ever given, which of course this was at a funeral in Mormon history, but also in American history.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So I think the big break from traditional Christianity that he had was probably when his brother Alvin died, and the preachers were telling
Yes.
him, "Oh, he's going to hell because he wasn't baptized," and he's like,
Correct.
"Oh, um, I'm just going to completely break off from that then and just do my own thing," kind of a
Well,
thing, which I
I-
think was very, very brave of him to do.
yeah, and then I also tell people, evangelicals who are very critical of me, I say, we have to own this in many ways because that Presbyterian pastor who said that Alvin is burning in hell because he did not receive a Presbyterian baptism had no right to say that. But
Hmm.
because he did that and was way beyond his pay grade, obviously, it actually, I say that's really the foundational event that I say that's where Mormonism began was when Joseph Smith, it set Joseph Smith on a journey to, in his own unique and interesting way, whether poetically or literally, however you want to take it, he found a way to get Alvin into heaven. And that's essentially what was Mormonism.
Most likely, yes. Like I said, I'm not a historian. I'm a philosopher. I like to think critically about these types of things. So I am very open to that possibility. I think it's probably the most likely possibility of it. But in any case, you were talking about the King Follett discourse. So I mention it here, but first I mention a quote by Jean-Paul Sartre that people call the modern father of existentialism. He says he was the one who coined the term existentialism. You know, we think of Kierkegaard as being the father of existentialism, but it was really Sartre that really coined the term. He said existence precedes essence, which implies this idea that, oh, if we existed, if there was no external mind to think of our, there was no God to think of our essence, we simply existed first, and then we create our own essence. You know, we exist, we put on whatever uniform we want, and we go out and we express ourselves as ourselves. You know, we create our own existence is what he wanted to champion people to go out and do. And then when I heard that phrase, I immediately connected it to the premortal life. You know, you and I talked about a little bit about whether or not that was actually something that uh, early Christianity got into. I believe Origen and Saint
Yeah.
Clement
So,
of Alexandria
real quick,
briefly mentioned the
Stephen,
concept, but
real
as
quick.
far as the Bible goes, like there's not really much you can pull from. But I think it's an interesting topic. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no problem. I was going to say, why don't you exit out of the screen share for the moment, just because I want people, a lot of you who are watching this on your phone, we're just these two little boxes that's talking, and I just kind of want to unpack that a little bit as well. So yeah, it's interesting because this is really the key thing, of course, is this idea of a pre-existence. Now, this was entered this the one church father who certainly entertained this idea and believed in it, perhaps was Origen. And of course, he is an important uh, church father. There's no question, but he was also
Mm-hmm.
kind of considered to be a heretic by some as well. But he was an important. a voice in this whole time. And and there's this also this there is even within Judaism there's a sense of a pre-existence in which they tried to find a way in which the covenant people were able to be there at Sinai, and that they actually Jews who had yet to be born were also present there. And so we see echoes of this as well. I think it's an intriguing idea. I've even talked to Mormons who've told me that one of the key reasons that a lot of people might convert to Mormonism is because they kind of intuitively believe in a pre-existence that we've always existed. Of course, this then creates this real. And first of all, I just want to make it very clear. Most historians, most scholars will tell you that, and again, I'm just speaking just historically, and again, I don't. There's very little evidence that the idea of a pre-existence was widely taught by the early church. So I'm speaking, from a scholarly biblical thing, and I think I could probably
Mhm.
find most BYU scholars would probably agree with me on that as well. But Mormonism introduces this idea, and some of the general authorities have introduced this idea that it was actually a widely taught doctrine that was lost, and this was part of the restoration, which is a fascinating attack take on it, and I think it should at least be considered. But then there's this idea of, okay, who is God? And we as individuals, like, is like I could look at other gods and kind of look back and just say, well, is that God worthy of my worship? Right? And so I
Mhm.
might look at other religions and other Christian groups and their views of God, and I just say, okay, is this a God that I would want to worship? And in some cases, I would say, no, I don't think this God is worthy of my worship. Now, this is the question that I want to pose to you, and again, this is what I love about these conversations. Of course, we'll return back to the slide presentation as well. But there's because I had a couple missionaries a few months ago. They asked me, I said, well, what's the deal? Like, why do evangelicals or traditional Christians have an issue with the King Follett discourse? I said, well, and I just did like a little few minute talk, which I'm going to give right now, and then you can respond to it. And it's this idea. I said, well, look at it this way. Within traditional historic Christianity, we believe that God is outside of time and space and universe, that
Mhm.
he spoke the universe into existence. And so he being the ultimate creator, the first what they call it, the first mover or the prime mover, right? The very first event was when God spoke the universe into existence, our universe. There could be other universes for all we know as well. But God is outside of space and time. And so he is the creator of everything. And within Mormon cosmology, Joseph Smith introduces this idea that that material is eternal, and that God kind of, I don't know if we want to use the term evolved, and you can correct me, but evolved to a
Mhm.
level of being able to manage to be the first to organize material. And
Sure.
he had a body of flesh and bone like us, and that intelligences and matter and all these are eternal, have always existed, and that there wasn't a prime mover. There was just this universe and material that was disorganized, and this individual was able to figure out how to organize it. That ultimately was then be able to kind of create, not create, but organize the universe that we now live in. And so I went to the missionaries and I said, for us as traditional Christians, we look at the King Follett discourse as being a demotion of God, because now he's actually a mortal, in many ways was a mortal man like us with flesh and bone. And then the question becomes, are we to worship somebody just because we're part of the same species as this God? Um, why should is it because he's like our worship is because he's all powerful and he was the first to figure this out, and so now we're worshiping um part of the creation as opposed to the creator. Okay, I said a lot
Mhm.
there, and I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, that's where we get into it. Are Mormons actually atheists with extra steps? Kind of an idea, but it's possible. I think an interesting line that Joseph Smith has is God finds himself in the midst of intelligences, like almost implying he was the first to wake up and be like, oh, holy crap, there's all these other intelligences around me. I got to help them get to where I am now, or something like that. But, and, some Mormons would say instead of demoting God, it just brought us up to his level, kind of an idea. So you could probably go back and forth either way you want to with that. I think it's possible that uh, there's probably three. I think there's probably you can talk about the Trinity. There's probably three types of God. You could talk about the all-encompassing, universal, outside of time and space God. But then inside there's God the Son, who's, you have God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. Inside that universe, you have God the Son, that most Mormons would identify with Yahweh or Jehovah, who is the one that really organized everything together. But you have God the Father, who still exists outside of space and time, or some such thing like that. I'm not entirely sure, I'm just speculating here, but I think the core idea of the possibility of the universe having always existed, or to be like particularly our intelligence to some degree or another, is incredibly existential to think about. It in so many there are many horrifying angles you can take with it, but in any case, mine should I bring up my
Yeah,
bring
sure.
back
Yeah,
in
bring
my
back up the screen share. Yeah, awesome.
sure.
All right.
So essentially, Joseph Smith is talking about how, what if we have always existed? What if we are just as eternal as the eternal God himself? We've always been existing in one form or another. It's sort of like, I don't know, you could compare this to Einstein's theory of relativity, or how energy can never be destroyed or created. It's always existing. It's always morphing in and out of different shapes and patterns. And so I wonder, kind of like possibly in a way, our own consciousness is part of that flow. Maybe it's part of the Tao. It's all encompassing. So that's an interesting, very existential angle that I look at primarily, mainly in my first essay. So, in this book is a collection of video essays that I made for my YouTube channel. So you can, if you're a book reader, you can pick up the book and read it. If you're a YouTube video watcher, you can watch the YouTube videos of it. So you can do either one, whichever vibes with you most, I guess. But essentially, in this book, I look at that angle of Mormonism, of how we have always existed. So it's like Sartre said, existence precedes essence. Well, how much of an essence would we have if we've always existed? Kind of an idea. Maybe you could look at it as reincarnation, bring in a Buddhist angle. We've always just been in this wheel of samsara, and we've just been keep repeating and get regenerated over and over again. Uh, and so with that, with being, we are our own existence in a way. We are our own selves, our own beings within Mormon cosmology. And so the Book of Mormon, you could talk about how it's littered with how men are free to choose liberty and eternal life, or uh, captivity and death. We are existentially free to choose these things, and we are also eternally responsible to deal with the consequences of whatever actions we choose. And so it's like, in the Book of Mormon, you could look at it as the ultimate American version of what if Americans wrote the Bible, or something like that, because it's just littered with themes of liberty and freedom and free men versus king's men and all that kind of stuff like that. So it very much comes from Joseph Smith's own era, Joseph Smith's own thinking, and so it's like it's just filled with these themes of liberty and freedom. And so I think that's what an existentialist Mormon really grabs hold of, is being that free individual who chooses his own liberty and eternal life through the great mediator of all men, or captivity and death according to the power of the devil, in a way. And that is an existentially terrifying thing to think about. You know, Sartre compared it to anxiety. It's like, holy crap, I'm free. That means I'm responsible, and that
Yeah.
absolutely terrifies some people. That's why we're so willing to just lay it on other people and just go with whatever our leaders tell us to do instead of really questioning it and being our own existential individuals in a way. Any thoughts on that? Or
No, I think it speaks for itself. Very interesting.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So my book, I like to take a person on a hero's journey. The Joseph Campbell was influenced by Carl Jung, who came up with this idea of the collective unconscious, which is something I talk about in one of the chapters, which is where you see patterns of themes and symbols and across all cultures. So, Jacob Hansen has his collective witness model. I have my collective unconscious model. So, we can have a debate about that on, what is the best way of looking at metaphysical truth. And I think the collective unconscious way of looking at truth is very interesting because we see, as we see here, we get Harry Potter, we get Lord of the Rings, we get Star Wars, and they're all part of that hero's journey. They all follow the same sort of pattern that we get across so many different cultures that Joseph Campbell identified and was like, oh, so that's why we're always so drawn to stories like this, because they always follow the same template, this pattern. They speak to the individual inside us, and we were like, oh, I want to go and experience that hero's journey for myself and be called on an adventure and, go through the belly of the well and make an atonement with the Father and then make a magic flight back home, sort of an idea.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
So
that's yeah.
that's what my book is intended to take a person on. Of course, the essays are their own thing. You can read them individually, but also if you read it, I designed the book so that it takes you through. First you learn about what is this existentialism. You are free, but then it starts asking weighty questions. It starts taking you through the belly of the well. What does it mean to exist if you're in hell? What does it mean to exist in a world without justice? What does it mean to exist in a world where God is dead and truth is irrelevant? Or what does it mean to exist, you know, in general? So it takes you through all those weighty questions. And then finally it gets to um, the last chapter called the last couple of chapters that talk about becoming an Ubermensch or becoming a self-existent person and realizing the God inside yourself, with the last chapter. And then I end with a quote by Alan Watts talking about becoming a shaman and just going out and learn and relearning who you were before your mother and your father named you, or who you were before society put its expectations on you, and just becoming that shamanistic individual who feels free to express his existence however he wants to, in a way. Any thoughts, or Sean,
Oh
move
yeah, no,
on?
I think this is good stuff. I think there's this idea of you tying in with your book a lot of the Mormon philosophies as well. That Joseph, and again, this is really Joseph Smith was a remarkable thinker and a remarkable man, and I think that I can see how the cosmology of Mormonism can be very appealing to people because I think it speaks to them in much the way that it kind of follows that same template. And you could argue that Joseph Smith's life follows a template like that as well. So I think the story of Joseph Smith, I think the story of Mormonism, I think the story of the people group that went to Utah and established made the desert bloom. I mean, this is a biblical epic that's actually happening here in the modern world. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that the story of Mormonism is an incredible story. Not only just the ideas that it introduces, but the lived reality of the people, I think really resonates and makes
Yeah.
it.
So it would be, are there anything about the book itself that you want to ask questions about?
Well, I see you have one more slide left, and then we can
Sure,
exit out of
we can do
the
that.
that. Yep.
So this is my what I call my great dilemma. So you have Jesus over here. He's the great shepherd. He's the one that he'll go and find the leave the 99 and go find the one lost sheep and bring it back home. And then on the other side, we have an image of Sisyphus, the man who has the eternal struggle of carrying a boulder up a mountain only to have it roll back down again. And so for me, this is my eternal dilemma. Do I go with the shepherd? Do I allow him to embrace me? Do I become a sheep, a part of the 100? Or do I embrace my own? Do I embrace radical existence apart from the shepherd and just embrace the eternal suffering that would come with it? And I think this is an interesting dilemma that I am constantly wrestling with, that I never see anybody else wrestling with, that I think is unique to being an existentialist Mormon like myself.
Okay. Well, that's very fascinating. So why don't you exit out of that, and we can
Sure.
talk about your book. Um, and yeah, so this
I don't
was
know. What do you think? How would you deal with the dilemma? It's sort of like, do you go which direction is sort of like the question that I'm posing.
yeah, I think this is, part of just the deconstruction process that I went through. Um,
Hmm.
and I was an atheist for 13 years. And so there is a moment in time when I was reading um, Harris's book, A Letter to a Christian Nation, in which that one little tie that I still had to Christianity was kind of eliminated through just a paragraph that I read in that particular book. So this is a struggle for meaning and purpose and existence and who we are and in our relation to God. You want to exit out real quick so we can just continue the conversation?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I think these are important questions that we have. And for me it was a difficult journey. I tell people, I say, I think it's very cruel to accuse people of losing their faith, that they want to do it because they want to sin, or they want to do it
Hmm.
there any number of reasons why.
Sure.
And instead, why don't you just go ask them, what made you lose your belief in God, and actually have an adult
Hmm.
conversation. See, what happens is people put labels on people, and they're afraid. I said, listen, this is what look, you got to have these conversations. This is why we're here, in one sense, is to figure out why we're here. Does life have any meaning? And for some people, they walked away from belief in God for very good reasons.
Hmm.
I honestly think that for those of you who are prejudiced against people who no longer believe in God, you need to really reconsider that position, because I think that I think there's a validity to atheism, and actually, in my mind, all atheism is that it's a it's a form of Protestantism taken to its logical extreme. And so I consider atheists to be, especially Western-based atheists, to be Protestants. It's the ultimate protest. If you're willing to protest the vicar of Christ here on earth, you're only a couple steps away from protesting God himself, or not believing in God, or questioning that. And so I
Sure.
kind of look at atheism as being an important uh, conversation, and we need to have conversations with atheists, because I do believe that atheism ultimately is influenced by Christian worldview. And that if we can look
It
at all,
is. That's what Nietzsche tried to tell people, is that, you've separated yourself from God, but you're still living under his commandments. You're still following his moral systems.
well, and that's the thing, because I think if an atheist looks at this world and sees how broken this world is and how much of a mess this
Hmm.
world is, and they say, I can't believe there's a loving God that would have anything to do with this, so therefore I don't believe there is a God, or they become anti-theists and say, I don't want to have anything to do with a God that created this hellhole of on earth and how they would see it.
Hmm.
And so for me, it's like, okay, that's a legitimate Christian position to recognize the brokenness of this world and maybe see that maybe religion and belief in God is futile in that regard. And so I think I just look at, again, look, I did a full deconstruction process. I know a lot of people claimants who claim they deconstructed, but they really didn't. Maybe partial deconstruction, but to do a full deconstruction where you literally, you the idea of God is something that like it's almost preposterous to you. That's where it
Hmm.
was for me for a very long time. And so I'll always defend atheists, especially well thought. I'm not talking about the atheist that you ran into in high school who was being the rebellious kid who's just trying to cause trouble. That's just the kid. That's minor leagues. That's nothing. I'm talking about well thought out people who have really grappled with these questions. Now, I just tell people, say, listen, we can look at all the same evidence. We could look at all the ideas that are out there. And if you walk away as an atheist, I'll be like, I get it. I mean, I can understand why you did, why you are. And I'm not going to condemn you for being an atheist because I think that when everything's laid out, I can completely understand it. Again, I'm not being necessarily saying people should become atheists. I'm just saying that I can completely understand why people would become atheists. And actually, I think therapeutically, I think some people knew need to become atheists, especially if they've been victimized by spiritual and clerical abuse. And the very concept of God, people can find triggering. So they need to become atheists for their own mental health, and maybe that's for a period of time. I think that
Hmm.
there's just a lot of things that people aren't thinking about. And I think that philosophy and grappling with these questions, the dilemma, if you will, is something that I think will always be part of my life. I think I will be arguing with God and having conversations with him for
Hmm.
the rest of my life.
Absolutely. We shouldn't be afraid to wrestle with God like Jacob. I think I think everybody should have their own atheist moment and really just deconstruct everything. Like a lot of people talk about how Jesus Christ had his atheist moment when he was on the cross and he said, my God, why hast thou abandoned me?" Person, and that was his atheist moment. He's like, "Holy crap, I am alone. I have to stare into the abyss, and it's terrifying." And that's when he died and went to hell, and he sort of, this is where Carl Jung would talk about how he became a true individual, a true self, when he embraced the darkness within and he went to hell and he rose from the dead. That's what caused him to rise from the dead, glorified as the perfect self, because he was willing to face that internal darkness that so many people are not willing to face. So I think it's incredibly important that we all have our own quote unquote atheist moment and wrestle with that, and then come out on the other side a more perfect, more holistic individual.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I tell people, I said, I think, and I tell people this all the time. I said, the purpose of what I'm doing here is I am here to challenge your faith,
Mm-hmm.
but not necessarily challenge it to undermine it or destroy it, but challenge it to strengthen it. A
Sure.
weak faith that's afraid to grapple with these things because they are afraid they might lose their faith is a weak faith. That is not a strong faith. A strong faith is one in which you've grappled with these questions and you've been able to find a way back into faith or re-embracing your faith after you went through the gauntlet, right? And if you're not doing that, you're just kind of going through life, going through the motions and not really thinking about the remarkable, amazing thing that you and I are actually having a conversation and how mind-boggling that is and how improbable it is that you and I are having this conversation today and that the universe exists and we found ourselves talking to each other is a remarkable thing that we take for granted in so many ways. But the fact that that there is even anything is just as miraculous as there being nothing in many ways. I mean, it could go so many
Mm-hmm.
different ways. So a lot of people don't grapple with these things, and I don't know. I feel bad for them because they're kind of living a life of just superficiality that just going through the motions, and they tend to be very materialistic and very much about just their own wants and needs here on earth. And I think that when you do grapple with these things, I think you have a greater appreciation for your fellow image bearers who are maybe struggling with a lot of things in life, and I think you can find solidarity with people and actually become a better Christian as a result. Now, I'm not trying to judge
Sure.
people and saying, "Oh, I did it my way and I'm a better Christian." I'm not saying that. I'm saying
Hmm.
I went through the gauntlet. If anything, I tell people I deconstructed God, I deconstructed the scriptures, I deconstructed everything, but I found out that that process of deconstruction was actually God deconstructed me and made me the person that I am today. And I don't recommend the process of me getting here to everyone because it can be very devastating, but it did. I was able to go back to my people. And, I left the evangelical village metaphorically a quarter of a century ago. And then when I come back to it, the village is on fire. And so I feel like I have a ministry not to tell Mormons they're going to hell or
Hmm.
tell them that you're really not Christians. That's not my ministry. My ministry has always been to my people, because I think we're a broken people. I think the evangelical world is a complete mess. And I think we need to really get our house in order before we go around telling people how to live their lives. Because I think we need to look in the mirror and realize that we're the ones with the log in our eyes, not the speck. And so that's kind of how I see my role. And of course, I think that there are Latter-day Saints who probably might make same assessments about that movement and feel a need to maybe advocate for reforms and for people to think about things, and that's good too. I think so this is what's informed my life. I'm not a philosopher myself. Really, I wouldn't say I'm a philosopher at all, but I am influenced by my life experience, and all the books that I've read have made me the person that I am, including Joseph Smith.
Hmm. Well said. I think, and then you could say Joseph Smith's atheist moment was when he was in Liberty Jail and he was like, oh God, where art thou? Who's covering your hiding place, kind of a thing. So it's a very important thing to go through as an atheist moment. So not all atheists, separate themselves from God because they want to be sinners. Most
Right.
of them do it because they are genuinely curious individuals that want to deconstruct their own reality. So, absolutely.
Oh yeah, and just look at Mark Hoffman, man.
Hmm.
The guy blowing up people and everything like that. He's like he said, "Well, I'm an atheist, but if there's a God, I'm screwed." Basically. Had to recognize that whole thing here. I really enjoyed this book, and it gave me a lot of food for thought. And I really think it's important. And again, this there's a slant here, but we all have slants and biases. And I kind of pointed some of these out to you
Sure.
in our phone
It's
conversation.
hard. It's very hard to detach one from biases. Biases are always inevitable, but what's important is that you recognize that you have biases and allow criticism to come which direction you may.
So the name of the any for oh, I wanted to give you opportunity. Was there any final words you wanted to share with the audience or observations before I wrap this up?
Uh, so I would say if you like what we talked about here, I'm constantly deconstructing my own faith. That's all I do. I think that's what Nietzsche really did for me. I really butted heads against him. He's probably the most atheistic individual who ever lived. He really wrestled with the idea instead of just being a passive atheist, like so many individuals are today. There's like a difference between passive atheism, which are like your typical angsty teenager who's like, I don't like God anymore, so I'm going to be an atheist. Versus Nietzsche, who really wrestled with the abyss. And like, dude, this is what it really means to be an atheist. You have to look at the abyss. You have to look at the meaninglessness of life, and you have to deal with it. You have to try to overcome nihilism, become an Ubermensch, and kind of a way. And so, like especially his book Antichrist, I think if you're Christian, that is fundamental reading because that is just him just deconstructing Christianity and really making you consider some thoughts that you probably never had yourself about Christianity. So for me, it was Nietzsche that really helped me deconstruct my faith. I think he's absolutely a prophet in his own way. And so I talk a lot about Nietzsche on my YouTube channel. I talk a lot about a lot of philosophers, but yeah, it's so that's what my YouTube channel is all about. If you want to deconstruct your faith and become a stronger individual, you want to go to my spiritual gym, if you will, then that's a place for you to come pump some weights at my spiritual gym and deconstruct your own faith. So that's sort of what I like to do, like I was talking about with the collective unconscious, So on my you'll see on my banner I have, your typical Mormon heroes. You got Jesus, Joseph Smith, Captain Moroni, and Enoch. But then on the other side, you had guys like Carl Jung and Friedrich Nietzsche and Bruce Lee and Buddha that I think are very key. I love Bruce Lee because he's a fighter, but he's also his philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, which was his martial art, is all about taking applying what works, discarding what doesn't, and adding what is uniquely your own. It's about embrace. He's sort of the founder of MMA, mixed martial arts. He was all about, instead of just staying within one rigid system, go out and explore different avenues and take what and discover and integrate and experiment with things that work best for you.
Okay, well, so I'm just scrolling through here. This is a very interesting YouTube channel that you have. It's called This
I
Says
think so. Yeah.
And I also want to point out that we're going to provide a link here to the hardcover of the book. But of course, they can also, there's digital copies of these they can access as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, so there's the
Right there,
Kindle
Kindle.
version,
Mhm.
hardcover, and paperback. So
Okay.
whichever floats your fancy,
Right.
or you go back to my YouTube channel,
Hmm.
click on the videos,
Okay.
scroll down a little bit, right? Scroll up. You bet you missed it. Scroll up.
Okay.
There's the video version right there, which is like the compilation of all the essays
Okay. So we have
that
Latter-day
are.
Saints Are Existentialists. And so if you want to
Mhm.
actually just watch the book, if you will, and listen to
Yeah,
it,
so you'll
that's free
see
of
I
charge.
also talk about anime because I absolutely love anime. So like I got one on Yu-Gi-Oh and one on Dragon Ball. So I don't know any other Mormon YouTube channel that talks about anime and
So
philosophy. So,
we
but
got anime
that's
in here as well, which is really interesting. I love all this
yeah.
stuff. You're engaging different ideas, also engaging modern culture and modern ideas. Good stuff,
Hmm.
man. Good stuff. So I just want to tell you once again, I'm so glad to be an owner of a copy of this book, and I believe you sent me two copies as well. So maybe we will do a book giveaway on the second copy. But Stephen, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the program. Again, it's called Latter-day Saints Are Existentialists. I really appreciate the conversations, the series of conversations we've also had on the phone, which I think have been very informative and interesting as well. And I think if you're just
Hmm.
looking for a very approachable way to kind of look at a existential take on Mormonism and how they kind of these ideas do kind of interact, these philosophies of men, if you will, interact with the Mormon scriptures. This is certainly a good starting point. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the program today.
ありがとうございます。
Awesome, folks. Well, tell us what you think. We're going to have links in the description to everything that we talked about today. Also, for those of you who'd like to financially support us here at Mormon Book Reviews, we do have some options for you to support us, as well as a merch store, and it's greatly appreciated. We do appreciate everybody who does support the channel. We're a small channel too, and I'm not here to make money. I'm here to build bridges and blow up silos and tear down walls and have continue to have these very important conversations here. So just remember the most important thing is this. All the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.